Welcome to Stone Ridge Confab. I'll be your host today, Scott Frappier. Really looking forward to going over, obviously, some of the supply chain perspectives in the Microsoft Dynamics 365 and Microsoft 365 stack. So really looking forward to today. There's just been a lot of talk, obviously, on distribution, the capabilities around distribution, and really how Dynamics 365 can help you, obviously, with your distribution business. And today, what we really want to do is we want to dig in a little bit more into the software. Instead of doing like PowerPoints and, going through step by step, for example, all the different things that we can do, really what I wanted to do today was highlight some of the supply chain perspectives inside of the Dynamics product, some of the really cool features that we don't really talk about as often when we're in a demonstration. We're always so hyper focused on a specific process and how to marry up that process then to the business requirements. But the really cool thing about this is that there's even so much more inside of the Dynamics 365 stack and Microsoft 365 that we can use to be able to really address some of these distribution and supply chain needs that we're seeing out in market. So yeah, today is really going to be about that. I know that some people are trickling in. If you haven't been to a Stone Ridge Confab before, it's pretty self-explanatory. We've got basically a live stream here with some background music. We're going to show software as we go through this. As you have questions, input, feedback, you can actually pop it in the chat. Interestingly, we stream to 3 different platforms now. We're on Twitch, YouTube, and then also on LinkedIn. And so all those comments come in. So as you have questions, feel free to ask because I'd love to be able to address anything in the software and show you really some of those capabilities inside of the Dynamics and Microsoft solution stack. So I guess with that, let's talk about at a high level here some of the challenges that distributors face in the supply chain environment, especially in what we would classify really the North American market. Now, a couple things I want to preface with this. Now, obviously, many different distributors, depending upon the industry segment that they're in, may have different types of requirements, right? Imagine that. The core process typically in a distribution environment is very similar, but how you're getting products from a sourcing perspective, for example, if you're more consumer goods, consumer products, you may be sourcing a lot from overseas, for example, where landed costs and all those types of costs from a shipment and transportation perspective really add up to the profitability for a distribution-based business. And one of the things I just want to kind of highlight here is the fact that when we talk about distribution, we're not talking about typically high dollar value items that you're going to be usually selling in a distribution business. More specifically, distributors are all about volume, right? And that's an important concept just to kind of talk through, because if you imagine then what impacts obviously those prices, it's obviously not a production centric process. It's more of the overhead, the machinery, for example, that's needed to move that product, the transportation costs that are involved with it, the labor to do the picking and all those different types of operations. And it's just something that is becoming much more cost conscious, maybe would be the right word for it, where we just have a lot of distributors that are trying to minimize that cost so that basically they can actually be more profitable. And with the pandemic and with many of the different changes in really the world, what we're starting to see more and more of is that those cost perspectives are having such a major impact on distributors in the environment that we're in. So today what we want to do is we want to go through some of these core processes that work inside of the Dynamics 365 solution. And what I want to start talking about a little bit more, and I'm hoping you'll all participate with this at some level, really is how we can use some of the AI-based enablement to make this better for distributors, because there's all this talk about what AI can do. Well, what what can we show and what can we actually physically do at this point, which is really what we want to focus around, obviously, as we do this in Confab. So as always, don't expect a fully polished, perfect demonstration. I always tell people it's not a demo unless something breaks. So hopefully we can break something here today. But what we're going to do is we're going to start demystifying basically how we can use, for example, the finance and operations platform to really address some of these distribution-centric needs. So with that, let's go ahead and dive in. I'm actually going to go through and then share my screen. And really what I want to start with here is some of the major features inside of, for example, the finance and operations platform that allows distributors to get past these particular supply chain challenges that you have, to be able to record, for example, some of that detail and to really be able to obviously dive in here a little bit deeper. So with that, let's go ahead and share my screen, and we should have it right there. Perfect. So we have the finance and operations screen. So as you have questions, feel free to ask them in chat. I'm monitoring that over there as well. But really, I wanted to go through and start with some of the high-level perspectives here that we have from a finance and operations perspective. Now, the first and foremost that comes to mind, at least for me, when dealing with a lot of distribution business, is really understanding, obviously, what we're going to be selling, what we're going to be moving as a product, and what we have a demand for as part of that, right? So distributors are really good at basically identifying the sources of demand for these particular products, whether they're going through retailers or maybe a dealer network for that matter as well, or even direct to consumer. The net result of this is the fact that we need to be able to accurately predict what particular quantities of product we're going to need, because as you can imagine from a supplier perspective, we need to basically get some of that product potentially shipped over, and we may have longer lead times, we may have short lead times depending upon where it is, but we need to be able to start at least forecasting that perspective as we go through that. And one of the things I wanted to show is that we had back in the old days, so I've got an older instance here as well that we have spun up. We had this ability inside of our demand planning based capabilities to basically, for example, inside of our master plan, go to this concept called an adjusted demand forecast that we would then go through and then compute using really AI-based technologies, machine learning, basically the product quantity demand that we have for something. And if I click on, for example, my forecast line details here, it would give me a little bit more information than regarding the product quantities, for example, the demand requirement that's there, what model was used, for example, for demand calculation, whether or not there was seasonality, for example, if there was exponential smoothing. But the key thing here to note is that there's been this demand forecast-based capability really inside of the finance and operations platform that helps you identify really those demand needs. And this is where it starts to get cool in my mind. So this was something that they introduced, I think it was about 3 or 4 years ago now, onto the finance and operations platform. But we're getting a refresh with this, which is a much needed and deserved refresh as well. And I wanted to kind of highlight that here today as we go through some of these features. So one of the new features that is being added with the finance and operations platform, obviously with the Copilot enablement, which you may have heard of with the Wave 1 2024, really is around this new demand planning capability that's actually been designed for finance and operations, but also supports many different data sources for you basically to go through and then drive that demand. And one of the things that we've been talking about as an organization is the fact that we're not seeing, for example, the software just focused, for example, on building apps inside of finance and operations. What we're starting to see is that the Microsoft teams are actually developing additional functionality that may, for example, as I click on it, be an actual model-driven app that you then interact with as opposed to the finance and operations platform. This is just a really cool concept. So Matt Van Dyke on our team, from our CE perspective, if we think about it, there's a lot of new capabilities that came with the Power Platform, for example, that Microsoft has been really focusing on. And with the Finance and Operations Platform, what we're trying to do is we're trying to take all this sales data, for example, or the CRM type data, and use that to basically make smarter decisions then in terms of our forecast and what we need to order and what we need to produce as we go through those processes. So what's really cool about this, though, is the fact that we now have a model-driven app called Demand Planning. It's in preview at this point. That allows us basically to create the same types of forecasts that we saw, for example, with our adjusted demand forecast, which was a native app basically inside of Finance and Operations. But we're able to do that now on the Dataverse platform and then feed Dynamics 365, but also then use all of those great capabilities that were developed from the machine learning perspective for really the demand calculation. So I wanted to just kind of highlight this to start. So if we take a look at, for example, our demand planning in our preview, as you can see, there's a bunch of configuration that we can actually drive from an Azure machine learning based perspective, that if I create, for example, a new record here, I can then basically then align then a custom model that I've created inside of Azure ML to basically take and calculate then what my demand requirement is going to be. And some of the cool things about this, just at a high level, we're not going to get into a lot of details right now with this, and if you want to dig deeper, we'd be more than happy to do a much more focused demo, obviously, on this. But what's interesting about the concept is the fact that we can actually use the machine learning to basically take all this forecast data and basically then generate, for example, a true forecast that's using some of these machine learning based models such as ARIMA or exponential smoothing or seasonality that then is applied basically to those given products. And how does that look then? Well, let's take a look at, for example, a worksheet inside of here. If I look at my forecast and revenue, for example, for my actual worksheet here for my demand planning, when I look at this, what we're going to see here is that we've got much more, as you can see, that is being visually kind of represented here as we go through it. So we can have multiple forecasts, right? So when I look at these worksheets, when we initially opened it, one of the feedback items that we had in the old demand planning based capability is that if you look at it, it's not like I have multiple worksheets where maybe I need to segment, for example, some of the product lines that I may be managing. So in the new one, though, as you can see here, you can actually have, for example, different types of shared worksheets. As you can see, they forgot the S in here in our demo data, but it allows us basically then to create different types of worksheets that may focus on, for example, the revenue, may, for example, compare different types of formulas that are inside of here, right? And what we can do then is we can use that data then to basically compare. Like in this example, we've got a 24-month calculation that used, it looks like a standard exponential smoothing algorithm, whereas in our red line that we see inside of here, that's using what we call a REMA, which is autoregression integrated moving average that's inside of here. So this is just a really welcome capability. And if you think about it from a distribution perspective, you're going to want to have multiple worksheets. You're going to have, for example, information that potentially your end user, your retailer, if you're distributing to a retail environment, is going to want to share with you, that's going to help them with that particular forecast, which eventually is going to then drive, as you can imagine, the requirement planning when you do a MRP, or what we call planning optimization now, for what products I need to be able to order to be able to tackle that, right? So this gives us now the ability to start using then those different types of, as you can imagine, forecasts and data that comes in to be able to basically create then a profile for this. And from that profile, we can basically then calculate what the time buckets are, how we actually look at the model, for example, that's going to be applied towards this, what steps it needs to go through in order to do this. It's got a lot of great capabilities. And the cool thing about it, like on the data management aspect over here, you can use multiple sources now for this. Natively, it integrates into Dynamics 365, as you can imagine, with the finance and operations platform. But let's say you had another source system that is actually then providing some of that historical data. Maybe your retailers allow for you, for example, through EDI, to have your point of sale data that's going to be then conveyed over to here. Well, you could use that then as another forecast or even another data element that you could use then to go through and then do these types of calculations to really then get to your visualization and demand requirements. And the visualization is just half the story, right? Because if I scroll down a little bit, really what I need to be able to see here is how many units of this particular product am I going to need to have to be able to keep up with those demand requirements. So this is, like I said, from a distribution perspective, an ounce of prevention can really help distributors when it comes to identifying really what products we need and then the lead times that are related to it that actually then drive, as you can imagine, some of those advanced capabilities. Now, that's one area that helps, as you can imagine, from a distribution perspective, but there are tons of others, and I want to make sure we kind of go through some of the others as we do this as well. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to go through a process that really shows, for example, how LTL orders are processed, or even how like a small parcel shipment would occur inside of the Dynamics environment, because there's one component that typically is a very large driver then in terms of profitability. And most of you that are in the distribution business have probably already nailed it. Obviously, it's going to be those transportation costs, whether they're inbound or outbound as you're going through that processing. So let's go through and show how Dynamics 365 can really help with that. So first and foremost, typically, if I go, for example, to a sales order, and what we're going to do is we're going to generate basically a new sales order in the system. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say, for example, that we are selling to, I don't know, we'll take all wholesales inside of our demo environment. And I'm actually going to ship it from a specific site and warehouse that I have configured more for LTL shipments. Now, mind you, from a distribution perspective, you're going to have a mixture, right? And that setup and configuration in the environment, whether or not it's going to be potentially small parcel shipments or even LTL or full truckload type orders, it's supported inside of the same warehouse. But for demo, typically we separate them so that we can talk through the concepts. But there's also the concepts of some products are going to go into boxes and others are going to go onto pallets that are going to be shipped to a customer. They're both supported as part of that process. What I'm going to do here, though, is I'm going to start with the LTL. I'm going to create, for example, a sales order inside of here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select a specific item. And I'm going to use my HDMI cables inside of here. And I'm going to say we're going to ship over, I don't know, we'll say 200 of these things. And we're going to sell them at $36 each. And if I take a look over to my far right, if I take a look at my profit margin with it, it looks like we are going to be good. So I'll go ahead and save that away. And as you can see, our estimated margin on here, because the cost of these particular products is $24, we have a margin calculation that's occurring, and we can see that that $33 or 33.33% is really what that margin is going to be. Now, this is another area, like I take some of these features for granted, to be quite honest, but from a distribution perspective, remember the margin calculation that's related then to this particular sales order line can also then include additional details, such as commissions that may be related to it. You may then as well have, beyond commissions, additional fees or charges that are related to this as well, right, that are inside of here. And then on the line, you may have as well then additional details that you may want to track. For example, the quantities of inventory, or even then, for example, as you can see here, maybe we need to see what we can actually provide from an ATP or available to promise based perspective. So these are features for distributors that should be pretty much table stakes, right? You typically have available to promise as a calculation that you want want to make sure that you can use. And obviously, all of this can then integrate as well with EDI as you go through that processing. So let's stay, though, focused on really the transportation side of this, though. So what I'm going to do just really quickly here is that inside of the finance and operations environment, I can create many different orders. And this is just a really quick one that we're kind of going through and showing. But what I can also do when I actually go through and confirm this is then take that order and then start planning around how I want to ship that particular product to the end consumer of that product. So in this example, what I can do is I can go into, for example, my warehouse tab, and I can click on my outbound load planning workbench to start doing the alignment of what type of containers or rail cars or different types of trucks that I may want to use to basically align that particular product quantity. Now, a couple things to note here. Inside of our system, we have the ability to do what are called reservations, so that before you generate, for example, a pick, what the system will do is it will say, all right, reserve the quantity on this order so that when we release the load or waive that load, what will happen is it will know exactly what product quantity has been allocated against it, so it can actually go and grab that. And what's nice about this is you can have it set up to automatically do it. You can have it set up where it's a batch process. You can have it set up where it does it before a load is waived, as an example. There's just multiple configuration options that you can use to drive that. Now, what I can do here now from a warehouse perspective, now that I've got my reservation in place that's related to it, is I can go into what we call the outbound load planning workbench and start building out then what I view this truckload to be. Now, in demo, as you're seeing here, I'm clicking into a different area that would typically have some type of role segregation, right? And this is what's really nice about the finance and operations platform. You can, for example, do this as a single user. So let's say you're a smaller organization where you don't have a different transportation manager versus a warehouse manager versus an order processor. There's many organizations from a distribution perspective that I've interacted with where they have, for example, the salesperson basically generating the initial truckload, and then they're basically then handing that off or coordinating some of those transportation costs. Mind you, those are typically smaller orgs on F&O. More commonly, though, what's happening here is that you're going to have somebody entering in an order, or you're going to get it inbound from EDI or from a web portal for that matter, or even from Amazon, for example. And what's going to happen then is that you're actually going to then have a transportation manager that's going to be looking then at, for example, all these orders that come in that then need to be delivered. And some of these may be scheduled routes that you have. Others may be new routes that you have to create as you go through that process. But what we can do is we can actually use what's called a load to group that information together so that you are basically then, when a truck comes to a dock, you can waive the load, which will create the picks and the work to grab all the product to bring it to a location that can then be put into that truck. And you could pre-do that ahead of time, for example. You can do appointment scheduling. We'll kind of show some of that as we go through this. But the key thing here is that I can go into my supply and demand, and I can basically then generate a new load. And if I had 10 orders in this list, I could add all 10 of those as part of that. Now, another feature that I have, though, from a distribution perspective, is to use this concept called the load building workbench to make my job easier to basically identify what we call a load building strategy that would then look at all the orders and transfers and all those requirements, and then it would recommend, for example, the type of load template or size of container or rail car that we would use then to actually create then that particular load and that order. And just as an example here, the cool thing about this is that this is customizable. So if you have, for example, a load building strategy where you say, I always want to build to a full load, so I don't leave any space available inside of that container. And a container, I overgeneralize here because a container could be, for example, a tractor and trailer. And that trailer is a 20-foot trailer or a 40-foot trailer, and it has a certain amount of cubage or weight that can be loaded into that particular container. That's the same thing as a rail car, or same thing even as a air freight for that matter. So you can use these load building strategies then and even customize them to use even more complex logic, such as sequencing of items where higher priority items are actually included in that calculation first, and then there's another set of items that are inside of there. So this load building strategy class that we call it is something that can be used to extend that. But what's cool about this, like if I said, for example, an 80% load, I'm not going to worry about the dates, but I'm going to say that if it comes from site 5 and 51 and it's going to a specific region or zip code range, for example, or specific product filters. So this is kind of like I was saying, do these products first and then these products next. Well, I could do it manually by using the product filter capabilities to limit the products that would be recommended to be created for those given loads. And what's great about it then, from a load template sequence here, I could come in here and say, yeah, try to do it in a 20-foot container first. And if you can't, then move to, for example, maybe a 40-foot container, right? I want to just kind of highlight the fact that you've got to build that into the load building strategy logic, though, to take that into account as part of that. And what's cool about this then is I can propose those loads, and what the system will do is it will look at then all of the orders, all of the outbound demand requirements that are there, and it'll say, yeah, you should probably use a 20-foot container here, and you should add all of these given products then into that to be able to then basically go through and then create that given load. And finally, what you can do is you can click on the create loads action, and it would then generate basically those loads inside of the system. So if you think about it from a distribution perspective, especially if you have thousands and thousands and thousands of orders, you could have a load building strategy that is for the Gaylord for UPS shipments, for example. So that way, for a given day, you could actually go through and build a load which would represent the Gaylord for UPS or FedEx that usually they come and pick up from a distribution center. Well, you could waive that load to guarantee then everything that you've said that's going to be in that shipment then, or that Gaylord that is going to be loaded into that UPS or FedEx truck, is basically then waived, picked, and staged and ready then for you to go through and load that. And that same concept then, as you can imagine, applies to LTL or FTL as well. So I'm not going to do that right now, because what I want to also show here, though, is that when I generate, for example, a new load, there's also other things that are inside of here that are used then to make sure that from a distribution perspective, we're really following the right rules here, right? So first and foremost here, as you can see from a load template perspective, I'm going to go ahead and just get a song on here in the background so we don't have echoing. But as you can see here, this is where I can specify what's called a template ID, right? 20-foot container, 40-foot container, rail car, what's the width, height, and depth of it, what's the allowed weight that's related to it, what's the allowed quantities, can we split loads inside of here, right? So these templates allow for us to basically do the alignment then as to what we are actually going to be shipping. Now, one of the questions I get pretty commonly on the distribution side of this is that, does this relate to a tractor and trailer? And it does not. So one of the things to note with finance and operations is that typically we are bringing it all the way to what type of container is going to be doing the fulfillment of it, but we're not doing, for example, the route management of it, other than using the route management based capabilities to be able to determine what we would classify as a cost related to it for an outbound hub cost, for example. And so I can show that just really quickly here. So what I can do, for example, is I can create a new load. I could say I'm going to put all of these HDMI cables, which is on a pallet, into a particular load and click on OK. And then from here, what I can do is I can actually use what's called the rate route workbench to then determine what are those shipping costs going to be then for this particular product. And so what I'll do here really quickly is I'll do route with rate. So these are routes that we have and then rates that we can apply. We can do rate shops, for example. Most of you may know what that is in the distribution space, but high level, it allows me to actually set up multiple carriers inside of finance and operations. Excuse me. And then from there, I can actually go ahead and click on a button, and based upon the weight, where it's being shipped to, I can get different prices or costs that are related to it, which may then be more competitive for me, which may lower the shipping rate, because maybe in my distribution environment, I have a fixed charge that I actually do for shipping, or maybe I have free freight, right, as part of it as well. So these are different types of strategies then that you can use to help reduce then that transportation cost that's related to it. So if I do whoops, I clicked on the wrong one. I did the rate shop. I'll do route with rate real quick here as well. But from there, what will happen then is if we look down here, this is where we can then see the pricing that's related to it, along with the breakout of how we're actually going to be shipping this given product. So most of us know in the distribution environment that you've got, for example, different types of charges. You have segments that occur with it. Those segments then as well may have different classes, though they may have different types of charges, such as maybe you got to flip trucks, for example, or the trailer has a changeover to a different tractor for that matter. So those are different types of things that can be loaded then into your rating design, so that basically when you actually go ahead and then apply, for example, this particular route and rate that are related then to this, these particular transportation charges are going to flow then to that sales order. And depending upon setup, in this situation, we have a customer rate that we define for it, which means the customer is going to pay basically $5,000 for us to go through and then ship and transport that given product. But as you can imagine, in some situations, you're not going to have the customer maybe paying for that, and you may be then trying to encapsulate that shipping charge that you have inside of your end products for the retail price that's related to it. That's also another strategy, but you want to make sure you capture then those costs from a shipping perspective on the shipper rate here, or the rate, so that way then we know what we paid out to be able to have accurate profitability then for those given products. And once again, for distributors, this is huge. Like, you need to be able to make sure that you can track your freight costs that are related to it, because your margins typically are already low enough the way it is. So this helps you go through and then really align it. Now, once we've gone through and generated that load, there's just other steps then from a distribution perspective that make this really shine. And just as an example here, let's say then day comes next day, I've got my scheduled load shipping date. On my load, for example, if I click on this, I can record additional details that distributors typically need. As you can see here, I can, on my details here, for this load, I can go through and define, as you can see, some of the additional details on the header here. If I actually scroll down to the bottom, I can, for example, specify the pro number if I already have that ahead of time. If I've got a tractor and car or trailer numbers, I can assign those as well. The cool thing about this is the fact that if you really did want to get to building something where loads are actually a data item, potentially in what we call our Universal Resource Scheduling Board, which is actually a Dynamics 365 CE concept, we could actually do that. Meaning we could take a load, have that come over into the scheduling board, and then on the far left, you may have tractors and trailers that you then drag and drop those loads onto to be able to schedule those shipments. And then from there, those trailer and tractor numbers, or even car numbers, may be then listed inside of there. So you can, through customization, get to that more final mile that you may be then doing. For example, if you have your own tractors and trailers and you want to do the delivery of those in your distribution environment, we have the ability to get there, obviously then through customization, so that you can then tackle that business process. Now, there's more than this too, as you can imagine. Seal numbers is pretty common as well. Those are all part of it, so just know that you do have that ability as well. All right, let's keep rolling here. So next thing I want to do then, obviously, next day comes by. I've got a truck that's going to be here in 4 hours. I need to go pick that product and get it staged, right? I want to have it basically right by the bay door so I can actually go through and then load that. And if you've got 6 different bays, you may have 6 different loads that you're going to be building. So that way you can actually then locate those products at each of those bay doors ahead of time. And especially for larger organizations, you're going to have individuals that are picking product that are different than typically loading it, especially in high volume environments, right? Now, do you have to do that? No, you don't. It's configuration. You could have it from a pick to go directly into the truck if you wanted to as well. That's really up to you in configuration. Now, in this environment, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pretend now that I'm that warehouse manager, and I'm going to say, yep, this truck is going to be coming in for distribution. I'm going to go ahead and take this and release it. I'm going to validate to make sure that everything is on here correctly, and we can see that the load is valid up here. And finally, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and release that to the warehouse. And what I'll do is I'll get my mug out of the way so you can see it. But what I can do then is I can highlight this load and then basically go ahead and release it to the warehouse. And what we're going to see here then is that the system will actually go through and then generate the work that I can do to actually basically start doing the picking process. And just to kind of see that, if I click on my related information and I look at my work details here, we can see that there's actually been some picks and putaways that have actually been generated, more specifically picks and then put actions, excuse me, where I'm picking it to a staging location, and then from the staging location, I'm putting it into, obviously, the truck, or what we classify as a bay door in our demo environment here. And just to kind of highlight that, this is also another feature from distribution that's really important. So just as an example, I'm going to go ahead and open up my handheld scanner here. And this is awesome. Like, I mean, how many people want to have handheld scanners to go through and then do really those warehouse activities? And these handheld scanners, there's all these different types of devices that are coming out now. We've got, for example, the phone type ones, right, that are here. But you may also have, for example, a tablet. And what's cool about this warehouse management app that comes with the finance and operations platform is the fact that you can actually now do some of these different types of transactions then from the handhelds. And for a distributor, you're going to need this barcoding, EANs, you name it, UCC 128 labels, right? You're going to need all that. And typically then you're going to use these handheld scanners to do those processes. And just to kind of show this, as an example, if I click on my outbound processing here and I look at my work list, we can see, for example, that 645 work that I have that's inside of here is something that I can then go through and start doing a picking process against. So for a distributor, making sure that the system is recommending where you go get product so that you're not looking around the warehouse to find it is really important. But even beyond that, what's in that particular row? What's in that bin in that row? What's in that bin on that pallet? Is the pallet mixed, for example, where it may have different items that are inside of it? Now, these are concepts then that are extended in F&O that allow you then, for example, to scan the pallet, or what we would call a license plate. And in this example, I could say, all right, I go and scan that pallet. The little barcode on it is 51 SRF. I then take 200 of those, and maybe I've got another pallet on a forklift that I have inside of here. And then I've got a reel of other barcodes that after I've now taken all 200 of those, I have them on my pallet on my forklift. I then put a new label on that pallet and I scan that label. So we'll call it new label 01, right, as an example. And now what's really cool about this is the fact that it's telling me, okay, great, you've loaded all that up on that particular forklift. Take that, put it away, and bring it to the staging location that's inside of here. Now, a couple things to know, because I get this question all the time from a distribution perspective. People are always asking, well, I want them to scan the location, or I want them to scan the batch number, or the lot number, or the serial number. That's all configuration. Part of the mobile device setup here allows us then to say, hey, when you get to a bin, you've got to scan the item number on top of, for example, the actual license plate, for example. And, you know, for some, that sounds really enticing. And then you find out you got to scan it 200 times. Yeah, right? You got to have that balance that's inside of here. So part of this, obviously, from a distribution perspective, is to make sure that we're optimizing the process to be as accurate as possible, but without the transactional overhead. And that's something just to note, is that transactional overhead in a distribution environment can really kill worker productivity. So, like I said, always remember to focus on really minimizing the interaction of the transactions for the scale that you're looking at to make your workers more efficient as they go through those processes. Now, in this example, basically it's telling me to bring it over. So I'd hop in the forklift, I'd bring it over. And then what we should see here at the bottom is that we actually do have work that's completed. And I'll get my mug out of the way as well again. But you can see here, this is a multi-step process for our pick and staging, and then from staging, putting it into the truck. As you can see, we've picked it to the staging location. And now what would typically happen is you'd have another user that would be actually in that staging location with forklifts that are then loading the truck so that we're not, going into the truck and running over each other as people are picking those particular products. And how would I do that? Well, I'd go to my sales loading as an example here. I'd scan the new barcode or the new label that we had, right, that we put on that particular pallet that's now sitting in that staging location. And I may have 6 other pallets that are there as well that I want to scan, right, as part of that. So I could continue to scan those. But eventually I'll get to the end of the line of that and I'll say, yep, I'm all done with that. And then it's going to tell me basically to take that and then put it into bay door. And then from there, if we look at our work now that was generated, we'll see here that it's actually gone through and then completed inside of the system. So this is, like I said, just a really nice feature in making sure that we're aligning then that work. And then as you can imagine, what we can do here is we can confirm the outbound shipment. And once we confirm this, so typically what's happening is that you've gone and you've loaded up that particular trailer now. The worker comes out and says, yep, we're all done with that. Well, then you're going to generate some of those additional documents, right? You're going to generate a bill of lading that you're going to then hand, for example, to the driver so that they have that documentation. You're going to post the packing slip, for example, inside of here as well to actually then show that the sales order has been delivered inside of Dynamics. And then you may be then using EDI to send, for example, an advanced ship notice then to your retailer so that they can then expect that shipment. And the cool thing about it is that if you use some of the containerization, you can actually send the packing detail related to it as well, where the box detail is then, you've got the shipment box and then item detail that's inside of there as part of that. So just a lot of great capabilities there that you can drive for it as you go through that process. And it doesn't stop there either. So distributors, obviously, from an LTL perspective, that makes a lot of sense. What about for small parcel shipments, right? Because you're going to have a lot. There's more and more of these companies in Dynamics that use Dynamics that really focus on some of those types of shipments where we're just taking and packaging different products as we go through that. And I can just highlight that really quickly here. If I create a new order inside of here and we'll sell this product, we'll do the HDMI cables again. But what we're going to do is we're going to actually go to Sunset Wholesales inside of here. And I'm going to deliver this from a different warehouse that I have enabled for packing inside of our system. And this is what's really cool about the distribution capabilities is that with a lot of systems, you need to have like 3 different systems. Like you'll have UPS World Ship along with your business systems, and you'll do that swivel chair concept, right? That you'll use to enter in the address information. Well, you don't have to do that, for example, on the Dynamics 365 stack. So just as a quick example here, I'm going to put some HDMI cables inside of here. We're going to sell them at $36 again, and I'm going to say we're going to do 10 of them. So this actually does obviously align a little bit more than with the actual small parcel shipment type capability. Same concept before. I can come into my inventory. I could do reservations if I wanted to as well to make sure that that inventory has been hard allocated against. And what I can do is I can take this order and then basically confirm it. So now it's actually something that I can release then to the warehouse. And this is an important step because sometimes you're going to enter in orders that you don't want to release to the warehouse yet. and you may even want to reserve quantities against those particular products in the warehouse, but still not release it to go through the picking process, right? So this is all configuration that we drive with it. But eventually here, what's going to happen, like in this situation, instead of building a load for it, what I'm going to do is I would actually go ahead and directly release that then to the warehouse. And you can see here that we had a credit limit check that occurred as well. And we can see that the work was created, but I can go to my warehouse as well, and I can look at my work details, and we can see that this is actually telling me to do it a little bit differently. Now, once again, kind of get out of the way here, you can see that I'm actually going through and taking my pick from the bulk location, and I'm bringing it basically to the packing location inside of here, right, as part of that transaction. So let's show what that would look like just really quickly here. So what I would do is I would go ahead and I'm going to just have my work ID inside of here. I'm going to cancel out of my screens, and I'm going to change my warehouse so I'm actually in the 62 warehouse that I'm interacting with. I'm going to go to my outbound process here, and what we're going to see is that I should do, for example, a pick here, and in my work list, I should now see that pick, which is 646 that's inside of here. And what I can do is I can go ahead and say that this is going to be box 001 is what I'm expecting this to be, right? And I'm going to bring this to the packing location. And so now what's really cool about this is that I've taken those 10, and I may have had a tote, for example, maybe a cart that I'm using, that I put all of those products into. I print it out, or I've got a roll of labels. I put the box 001 label on that because I'm picking it to the order level, not to a LTL order level. And what's happening here then is that as that tote then comes to the packaging or packing operation, what I can do here then from a pack perspective is I can actually set up, for example, the packing site where I can say, yep, I'm in 662, and I'm actually going to do some packing operations, and when packing is done, I want to create work inside of here. So now the tote comes down the line, I see it right here, I go ahead and say, yep, scan box 001. It already knows what is open in that box or what products are expected with it. What I can do is I can say, yep, let's generate a new container. I'm going to use a medium box for this as part of it, and I could have different box sizes and requirements and restrictions that are around it. I can click on OK to that, and then what I can do is I can come in here, and you can kind of see it if I get this out of the way, is I can come in and start packing these items. And maybe I'm using a wedge scanner, a handheld scanner, and I'm doing it each individually. Maybe I'm coming in here and saying I can do 10, for example, and then put in the identifier or the barcode number that's related to it. And then finally, I can close this container, put the weight that's related to it. We'll say it's 10 pounds at this point. And when I click on OK, then you're going to see that work was even generated for then the container at this particular station. So if I look at those containers or those boxes that I created, we can see here that I've got the 10. And if I look at this work detail, then I should see then that I have a very similar process, as you can see here then, to what we saw before in the LTL stage, which is where I'm taking it to the packing station, bringing it to a staging location, and then loading it then into that given truck, UPS truck, or whatever it is as part of that process. So I will go through each of the steps on the handheld then for the packing. It's basically exactly the same as we go through that process. So I wanted to kind of highlight those because, as you can see, if you're really focused on supply chain and distribution, and you have scenarios where you've got the LTL loads, which is just kind of table stakes, and also then, for example, the small parcel shipments, these are native features then inside of the finance and operations platform. And it goes even further than that. So if you're if you're focused more on a retail market, for example, and I'm just going to show it really quickly in my demo environment here. There's also these concepts of like distributed order management, right? And what DOM does, for example, as I looked at these unprocessed lines or fulfillment plans that are related to it, they can basically go through and then figure out exactly where we should be fulfilling that particular product quantity from. So if you enable distributed order management, you can actually input orders into the system without specifying, for example, exactly what warehouse you're going to fulfill it from, but you can have then the distributed order management capability run that'll actually then identify based upon cost, based upon distance, based upon, even other factors that you can even customize and configure, basically what warehouse should supply that based upon your fulfillment policies that you define inside of your organization. So this is, like I said, this is really kind of nice from a distribution perspective, especially on the retail side. If you have retailers where you then want to align the closest warehouse to what's going to do those given shipments inside of your organization. So let's do one more thing here. So I just wanted to make mention of that because I know there's lots of customers that use that capability. One final thing here. So obviously this is all distribution centric, but what about like starting to use some of these new tools from an AI perspective? Like what can we use inside of finance and operations to make that experience even better? So obviously there's new features that have been issued for 2024 Wave 1. Once I get a hold of those, expect on Confab for us to demonstrate and show those capabilities. But I'm too impatient. How can we use Copilot now inside of finance and operations to help elevate some of the conversations that we have? And you know what? We can use the Microsoft 365 based Copilot capabilities to do this, even though it's not integrated into Dynamics. So how do we do this? So as an example here, one of the things I always show people is the fact that sales orders, lists, and things of that nature can be really tailored to your needs, right? So in my standard view here, I may come in, for example, I may add additional columns inside of here. I'll go ahead and just kind of show this just really quickly. In my new columns for this view, what I may do, for example, I'm going to filter on anything that is a number as an example. So we'll say anything that is a number, and I want my maybe approval amount, total amount. I could do others that are in here as well, as you can imagine. But what I can do is I can add then those particular fields into this view. And on the far right here, if we had values that were inside of here, we would then see, for example, the approval amounts. And I can actually take these views and save them. I could say this is my total amount view, right? And click on save. And now I've got, for example, some sales order details that then have these different types of fields that are exposed on it. Now, if I click back on my all sales orders, and we'll go ahead and then select that view as an example, one of the other features that we have is the ability to take this information and basically open it or export it to Microsoft Excel. So this is where things get really fun. Now, it's not perfect. This is Confab, right? We're going to try to break stuff. But what I'm going to do here is I'm actually going to export this and then save this. And I'm going to download it as an example to my computer in the background here. So now that I've done that, what I want to do is I want to go ahead and open this inside of Excel. And so I've got my sales orders right here that are inside of here. I'm going to click on that, and we're going to then open up Excel inside of here. Now, I'm on the Insiders program, so I've got some little messages that pop up inside of here. But one of the features that's been added now into Excel, into Word, into PowerPoint is the ability to access Copilot directly inside of these applications. So that got me thinking. I'm just like, you know what? We already use Excel for a lot of this ad hoc inquiry and analysis. We use these views, for example, inside of the system to, show and group and do all the cool things that we need to keep track of all of this. Well, what happens if I want to use Copilot now inside of here? And I want to show an error that we're probably going to see here as well regarding this, because it took me a little bit to figure this out. So right now, as I look at my Copilot on my far right that's inside of Excel, so this is on Microsoft 365, we can see I've got a big error message here that says you need to validate your Copilot license. And it's like, wait a second, Bobby already gave me the Copilot license. I don't understand what's going on here. Well, if you click on the link, they make it very not informative, I think, for end users. You're going to have to think through this. I have this saved on my local computer. My local computer, I don't want Copilot to have access to that data because this is tenant-specific data and a tenant-specific policy that we've applied then to Copilot inside of our organization. What that means then, though, is that if I try to use Copilot on a file like this XLSX that we just generated, and it's not on the company's internal OneDrive, well, it's not going to access that information. So these are the concepts that are starting to come out now as people are starting to use Copilot, for example, as to where Copilot can reach in to grab that data to interact with it. So to do this, what I have to do is I actually have to save this inside of, for example, my Stone Ridge environment. And so I'm going to just save that inside of our Stone Ridge OneDrive. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to close out of Copilot just really quickly here, or Excel, and I'll reopen it. And mind you, if you had Excel set up like this, maybe it already automatically does go to a OneDrive. One of the options I had when I was downloading it was save to OneDrive, so you could do it that way. But the net result here is if I click on my Open Now, and I actually go to the OneDrive inside of here, now as I click on Copilot, what it should do is it should now pass all of those checks. So you can see now that I can now interact with this. So an example would be, show me some data insights that are inside of here from this list that we just exported inside of finance and operations. And what we're now using is the data analysis of these particular values inside of here to generate then additional insights into our data. So I could say, for example, what is the distribution of sales orders by mode of delivery, right? So you can start asking questions of the data that you then have inside of Copilot to basically take this information then from a distribution perspective and then go through and then generate, as you can see here, the number of roads that have the specific modes of delivery that are inside of here. And then what you could even do beyond that is, create as a pie chart, right? So we can do things like that to basically then generate graphs and spreadsheet that we can then add then to another sheet, because as you can see here, the action add to a new sheet is something that we can use. Now, mind you, this isn't perfect. Sometimes with the charts and graphs, it's not analyzing it properly. You can see here, it's saying that you can't create a pie chart right now. So what I could do, for example, is just ask another question related to it. But the net result is that as this gets even better, you can just imagine that this analytical tool to be able to generate then those particular views into your data is going to become just so much more important here as you go through those processes. So just some to note. One other thing to note is that this same type of technology is actually in the 2024 Wave 1 release notes for Power BI. So you don't have to just export it to Excel. Pretty soon here, hopefully we're going to be able to use some of these Excel capabilities, Power BI capabilities. And I just want to highlight that as a final type of a thing inside of here. So for example, if I want to look at my supply risk analysis inside of finance and operations, so as an example here, if I look at my performance inside of here for a supply risk assessment, could you imagine as a distributor being able to have these pre-canned reports that are generated that identify, for example, how many purchase orders you're doing, what your on-time and full delivery is, what your vendor ratings are that are inside of here, but being able to then take this, for example, edit it in Power BI so that you can add additional tabs and you can actually access the same data that we have right now. You could even, for example, take these types of charts and graphs and then flip them around into maybe I want to have an area chart instead that I use with it. But all that data is exposed inside of here. This is just really powerful when it comes to then that supply chain perspective of being able to then do further analysis and then break out, for example, in this example, my worst on time in full vendor, maybe I want to have that, for example, as potentially a heat map inside of here. And then from there, we can make those changes really quickly and easily. So remember, distributors need reporting, and these reports are going to get better and better, especially then with the introduction, obviously, of some of those Copilot capabilities. All right, so that was kind of it for today. That's what I wanted to go through and cover. Obviously, as a distributor, hopefully, what you've seen here is that there's just a lot of great capabilities inside of the Dynamics 365 and M365 stack. We can use finance and operations, for example, to optimize our picking and our put away and our staging process flows for distributors. We can use model-driven apps such as the demand planning capability that are in Dataverse to take multiple sources of forecasts to then generate that data that would be used from an MRP or a planning perspective. We have Power BI that's natively integrated that allows us then to actually have these very detailed reports that we can interact with and update. And then with Excel and these lists, we can take that data and then use the Copilot capability to do further analysis of that data and basically generate, for example, additional charts, graphs, reports, and insights really into our data. And as you can imagine, as we go through and announce the Wave 1 2024 details, we're going to see more and more of those capabilities added into the solution. So with that, thank you all again for joining and attending Stone Ridge Confab. I hope from a distribution perspective, this has helped and made sense. Clyde, I really appreciate your comment in there. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to us. We would be more than happy to dive into detail around this. And obviously, as some of these more AI enhancements come to the F&O platform, we're going to make sure that we show them and talk about them as we go through this process. So with that, thank you again all for your time. Have a fantastic rest of your week, and we'll see you in 2 weeks from today for another Stone Ridge Confab. Thank you.